In this episode, we are going to be talking about something called Vuex because we are going to be using it extensively throughout this course or this video series. So I'm going to explain to you what Vuex is, what it does, what are the benefits of using it and disadvantages of not using a system like Vuex. So what is Vuex? Let's check it out on vuex.vue.js.org. It says right here that Vuex is a state management pattern plus a library for Vue.js applications. Now, pattern means it's a way of writing your code, and state management, well, that's state management. That's the way you would manage your data in some way, plus a library. Now, a library is Vuex, and that means it just comes with some helpers to help you manage that data. Now, what is a state management pattern? The most basic state management pattern in Vue is represented right here. So you would have something called data, which in this case, or in this graphical representation, is state. So this is your state, and your state is currently 0, so count is 0. Now you render that state on your Vue, and the Vue shows 0. Okay, now you want to do some actions. Your actions are your methods. So when you click a button, an action triggers and adds 1 to this 0, right? And then the state is changed through that action and your Vue is rendered again, and now it displays 1. Now this is great if you are building something simple. You have a few components, you really don't need Vuex if you are just doing a simple project. But if you are making a complex project like we are doing here with Rent-A-Car app, then you would need a bit more complex state management. So just to put it simply, before we get into how Vuex works, Vuex is just a single point of truth for your application. So Vuex is going to store your data, and that data is going to be available to all of your components. And once one component changes that data, all of your other components would be aware of it and react to it properly, right? So it's represented right here. So this part is Vuex. It consists of actions, mutations, and the state. So state would be for that example up there. So this example right here would be 0. Then it would render a component and show 0. Now you can have some actions which you would dispatch and then commit to a mutation. So mutations are just a fancy way of saying changing your data or mutating your data. Then mutations mutate your data, update your state, and then your component is rendered again. Now this representation right here is good, but the real power comes with not just one Vue component, but hundreds of Vue components, or however many components you have. They will all depend on this data, and they will all be aware of the changes in that data. So this is something that we will be needing in our project. And now I'm going to show you first the problem, and then how you can solve that problem with Vuex and code form. So we are going to go to our editor and actually start writing some code. So in our home view, we are getting some data right here. And if we check it out in our browser, we can see that that data is right here. So we are getting titles, IDs, slugs, and so on. Okay, great. Now let's create another component in components right here. So we are going to create a new component and call it vehicle list. Vehicle list.vue, and in that vehicle list we are just going to add a template. Let's do a div h2 vehicle list. Okay, so this is all we need for now. We are going to go back to our home and register that component. So this is going to be vehicle list. Okay, and let's just register it right here. Okay, so we registered our component, and now we can display it on the page. Vehicle list, great. save this. And as you can see, we get this title right here. Okay, so now, since we are getting this data in our home view, let's say we want to pass that data to our component. Now we need to do this by doing something like, first of all, let's create our data right here, or create some sort of state for our home view. So we are going to create data or state which is going to accept vehicles as an array, and then we want to set that vehicles once we get all the data from our API. So right here I'm just going to do this vehicles equals response.data. Okay, right? So we are setting what we are getting from the API right here to this. Great. Now that we have this set up, we need to somehow pass that data to our component. So what we are going to do now, you have of course two options right here. You can just go to a vehicle list right here and then call your API again and get that data that way. But you may have multiple components which are going to be child of this component, so maybe it's better that you actually call that data here so that you can pass them to your child components. And to do that you would need to use props. So for every component that you want to pass this data to, you have to go to that component, do script. Let me make this bigger, sorry. So export default, and then you would need to define your prop, and to do that you would do something like props, and then the name of your prop, in our case is going to be vehicles, and you would need to define a type for your prop, so what you are getting from your API. And in our case that's an array, and then you can define default value for that array, and that default value would actually just be a function with an empty that will return an empty array. So you can just write it like this, right? And that's it. Okay, save this. Now you need to go to your home view and pass the data that you are getting from this component, pass that data to your vehicle list component. So you would do vehicles. So this is what we named our prop. So our prop is called vehicles, and you just do this colon vehicles, and we want to pass vehicles that we are getting from our API. Okay, save this. Now of course nothing will happen here because we still didn't go to our vehicle list component and actually display that data. So we are going to do that now. So we are going to go to vehicle list, and right here I'm just going to do something like ul v4 equals, so we are going to take vehicle and index, because we need a key, and the key for our for loop is going to be index, and in vehicles, right? So vehicles are referring to this prop. Great. Now we just go key is going to be index, so that Vue doesn't squawk at us. And now we are just going to, in li, say something like vehicle dot name. Okay, save this, go to our app, and we are not getting the names. Okay, I'm sorry, it's not name, it's title. Right, let's check this out now. Okay, so it's vehicle 1, vehicle 2. Right, we are getting our list. Okay, so this is great. This is the way you would do it without Vuex. So you would actually need to create a component, get some data to that component, pass it to your child component, and then you would have to worry about throughout your project that the components that you want to send data to are children of some other components. And of course, sometimes that won't be possible. Then you would have to call this API again, so duplicate your code, or maybe do some JavaScript magic, which will complicate your things even further. Then if you need to get your data from your child component to a parent component, then you would have to listen for events, and then that child component should emit that data upward, and then your parent component will get it, and so on. So it would get more and more complex as you start building that application. As I said, this is a good approach if your application isn't going to be very complex. If you have just this one view, this can be your single point of truth. You can just push your data to your components, and that's great. But if you have multiple views like we are going to be having, then you really need something like Vuex to keep that data centralized and to be able to pass that data to all of your components, and so that your components would be aware of any changes that happens to that data. So right now we are going to do this same example but using Vuex. Okay, so now we have this file called store.js, and we got this file because when we installed Vue, we said that we wanted to use Vuex, and this is our actual store. So on that graphical representation that we had right here, so the store.js is in our case this. So this is actually Vuex in store.js file. Okay, so as you can see, we have state, mutations, and actions. We are going to add getters here also, but first of all, let's deal with state. So state is very simple. State is just the same thing that you define right here. So this is just the state of your application and the state of your data. So just like we had it in home.view, we're just going to say vehicles and array. So we are expecting to get an array of vehicles right here. Okay, next we need to define some getters. So just like the name says, there are going to be helper functions that are going to get our state, and you have to call them something. So we are going to call this all vehicles, right? All vehicles is state.vehicles. So we are going to use getters in our components so that we can get the current state. In this case, it's going to be called all vehicles. You will see this later. Then you have mutations. So for mutations, we are going to define a mutation called getVehicles. So you write mutations in all caps when you're naming them, and it's going to accept state. So we want to get access to our state and vehicles. Remember, so mutations change your data. Right now our data is empty, so we need a mutation to change that data to put data that we are getting from our API into this vehicles variable. Okay, and what this mutation is just going to be doing is going to take data from our action and put it into vehicles. So you can just write something like state vehicles equals vehicles, right? So this is our mutation. And then we get to actions. Now actions are methods, so we can just do something like first define our method. So get vehicles, you do this, so commit, we want to commit it to a mutation. And then right here, you can just go to home.vue and copy this. Right? So just like this method mounted right here, we are just going to put that into this section, and we don't need this console log. Instead of doing this vehicles vehicles equals response.data, we are just going to commit it to get vehicles mutation, and we are going to send it vehicles or response data, right? So we are sending that right here. This method right here is going to accept our state, and it's going to get these vehicles from response data, and then it's going to set the state of vehicles to be vehicles, right? And since we don't got Axios, then we would need to import it, of course. So right here we have Axios, copy it, paste it right here. Okay, so this should actually work, right? Save this. Now we can go to our home.vue, remove Axios because we don't need it anymore. Then we can remove this data right here because we don't need that anymore. We will leave the components, and we can also remove this. We don't need that, right? So we just have name, home, and components that we are calling custom button vehicle list. Okay, so of course, if we go to our browser right now, check out our app, we are probably even getting some errors because on vehicle list we are calling vehicles, which we are not getting, but we are going to get them right now. So in our vehicle list.vue file, we are just going to remove props because we don't need them anymore. And then we are going to say computed vehicles. So this is the way that we will get our vehicles, and we are just going to say return this .store .getters .all vehicles. Right? So this is the getter method that we defined earlier. So if we go right here, as you can see, we called our getter all vehicles. So we are getting all vehicles. And now, since this is just a computed property, we need to display it somehow when this component is mounted. So what I'm going to say right now here is mounted. And we are going to dispatch an action to our store so that it fills that data so that it fills our state with the data from our API. So we are going to do this .store .dispatch and get vehicles. Right, so what this is doing is going to dispatch an action to our store, and that action is called get vehicles. So this one right here is going to run that action, and then the mutation is going to add that new data or mutate this empty array to a filled array with the names of our vehicles, IDs, slugs, and so on. So if I save this and go to browser right now, as you can see, we are now getting vehicle 1 and vehicle 2. If I refresh this page, we are still getting warnings for method vehicles. This is because in our home.vue we need to remove these props right here because we don't need them anymore, because we are getting our data from Vuex. Right, if I refresh this, errors should be gone. And there's one more cool thing. So if you have installed Vue developer tools, you probably should if you're doing anything with Vue. If you go to view, you have state right here, and if you click it, you see this base state and you see your state. And once we get more into Vuex, and once this series continues forward, we will be able to see whenever we change something that this state right here is also changed. Also, you can see your getters, all vehicles, and you get pretty much the same thing. So this is our state right here, and we can always inspect it in our Vue DevTools. Okay, so this is it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember, everything we did here will be available for you on GitHub. The link will be in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.